Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the number one home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
All right, welcome back to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones. And you have to be super happy this week, Ducks fans, as the Ducks pulled it off. They won the Pacific Division for the fourth time in a row, Eddie. Just like we predicted, they dominated the whole season and took over the division. No, just kidding. They really came back and won the division in dramatic form, Eddie, this past week. How crazy do you think this last week was, given some of the losses and some of the wins, for the Ducks to come out and win this division, Eddie?
Yeah, and really with the two heartbreaking losses to Winnipeg and OT and losing to Vancouver 3-2, those were games that we said you had to win if you wanted to have a chance. We go into the game against LA still having a chance if you beat them, and then losing to them and losing the chance to decide your own fate. Then LA goes into the crazy game against Winnipeg. We all think it's over. I think 90% of the fan base was resigned to playing San Jose in the first round. LA was pretty much on the cusp of winning their second ever Pacific Division title. And Winnipeg makes an amazing comeback, wins in a shootout. We've still got a chance, but you got to beat two teams. They beat the Avalanche. They beat the Washington Capitals, although shorthanded, and still just like you said, an amazing comeback from where they started at the beginning of the season.
On this show, we're going to go back through all the games this last week. Real quickly, we'll talk about what happened, the wins and the losses and everything involved in those games. We'll get you up to date on the injury news that we know as of today. Obviously, some of that is going to change. The Ducks do not play until Friday against Nashville, so they're going to rest and hopefully get most of the players back for game one. And we'll also talk about the matchup against Nashville. We'll talk about the positives and the negatives, what we think will work for the Ducks, what'll be good for Nashville. We'll go into all that. Plus, we've got tons of fan questions as well. So let's go back to the beginning of this week. The Ducks played Dallas. They played an extremely good game defensively in this one, Eddie, getting shorthanded goals, and that was really the difference in this game. And the Ducks won this game, and you had to feel good about this victory to start off the week.
Yeah, and it was the game that we said was going to be one of the harder ones until you face LA. I mean, Dallas is and was at the time the best team in the Western Conference. They finished theirs as of this week. And they're a tough team. They score a lot of goals. They have their problems defensively. The Ducks took advantage of that. They gave up a lot of odd man rushes, and they took advantage of that and played a really, really strong game, like you said. And I think this was a huge start to that. The next few games to follow from here, and obviously in the end it ended up paying off.
Yeah, and you had to feel good after this win, and then the Ducks went into that game against the Jets, and the Ducks had the 1-0 lead. And you thought that they were going to win this game, and unfortunately a late goal by Marco Dano tied the game, and the Ducks ended up losing in overtime in this one. They still played pretty well defensively, but the offense kind of struggled in this one a little bit, Eddie.
Yeah, and the Jets are causing fits for all the Pacific Division teams at the end of the season there. I mean, a team that's been relatively disappointing all season is starting to turn it on at the end here, trying to play spoiler with the first line they have going right now with Ayler, Scheifele, and Wheeler was just on a roll in this game. They were on a roll in the game against the Kings, and those guys are out there what seems like every shift or every other shift, and the Ducks played a tough game in this one. They ended up getting the point, which turned out to be crucial in the end, but they made it tough for themselves going into the game against LA.
Yeah, and the way the games played out on that night on Tuesday, it was very interesting to see. You had the Ducks winning 1-0. If they would have won, they would have gotten the 2 points in regulation. You had the Kings who were losing to Calgary, and they end up coming around and winning in overtime. So at the end of the night, the teams were tied, but the Ducks had a chance to be up by 3 points. And go into that game against LA, closing it out and winning the division. Instead, they're locked up in a tie. The Kings had the tiebreaker, which I know there was some confusion with some of the fans. The first tiebreaker is the regulation or overtime victories, which the Kings ended up with 3 or 4 more than the Ducks. So they had that tiebreaker. So the Ducks had to get one more point to win the division. So the game against LA on Thursday was extremely crucial for the Ducks to win. Again, just like the game against the Jets, the Ducks came out. They got the first goal. They played a decent first period against LA. And then after that, Eddie, I really don't know what happened with the Ducks, but they didn't have as much fire going into the second period. They weren't taking the inside lanes as much. They played a little bit too much on the perimeter, with the exception of Corey Perry. As you remember, he and Quick went at it for a little bit again, as they always do. But I didn't like the way the Ducks played after the second period on. They ended up losing this game to LA 2-1, though I think Gibson could have stole this game, or at least a point for the Ducks. Even though the Ducks didn't play as well in this game, LA did get a few fortunate bounces on their goals, Eddie.
Yeah, and honestly, if it wasn't for Gibson, this could have been a lot worse. LA, outshot the Ducks, significantly in this game, and they outplayed them, pretty much after the first period and all the way throughout the game. I don't know. The forecheck in this game was going for LA. They're tight in the neutral zone. The Ducks didn't really have any chances. When the Ducks did have power plays, they got shut down pretty easily. It was just a tough game, and it's the style of hockey that LA plays, and even Anaheim plays when they're on their game. And you can maybe chalk this up to injuries. Having to play a lot of guys who normally don't play in the lineup, but. I think Gibson, like you said, could have stole this game for them. I think the Ducks still had a chance to get into it, but unfortunately, it was the result that everybody was dreading at this. Don't even pick up a point, and LA ends up finishing at the end of the night up 2 points.
And the situation was set there that the Kings could go on and win the Pacific Division. All they had to do was win any kind of fashion, 2-point win against the Jets on Saturday. The Ducks, even if they had won those last 2 games, again, like we talked about, the tiebreaker would have gone to LA. So the Ducks go into Saturday's game against Colorado. They call up a mess load of players that come up. Some of the guys rest. They sit out Stoner, Horkoff, and Santorelli in this game. Still play all the other big guns. The Ducks get it done against Colorado. If you remember, they hadn't scored a goal against Colorado in both games. This game, they go on fire. They score 5 goals. They end up taking out the Avalanche, put the pressure on the Kings against the Jets to play their full lineup, because now the Kings needed to get a win, or at least a point, which they ended up getting a point, and then put it back on the Ducks, which we all know what happened. The Ducks beat Washington to win the division. But I like the way the Ducks played in this game against Colorado, Eddie. They came out strong. They had a little bit of a lapse in the second period, but then they turned it back on in the third period. Getzlaf got a goal in there. Silfverberg, 20-goal scorer. I think you and I talked about this. We said he had a chance to do it, and he did it. I'm super happy for him. I know his parents are very excited. He had a great season so far for the Ducks, and that line is going to be something that we're going to talk about in the playoffs. But I did like the way that the Ducks played in this game against Colorado. They got a little bit of revenge for those 2 losses, Eddie, and they put the pressure on LA, which ended up, helping the Ducks get the division.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it was a game against a team who dominated us all season. Hadn't scored a goal against them in 2 games, lost 3-0 each time. Colorado does end up scoring 3 goals in this game, but the Ducks do get the win and pull out 5 goals, and just a great performance and in a must-win game. You have to win this game. They knew they would have to win in Washington too, and they'd have to rely on LA losing in any fashion against a Winnipeg team who'd been surging. But it's great to see Silfverberg hit 20. I mean, he ends up just getting it, hits it right on the button, and I mean, we said at the beginning of the season actually that we thought we wouldn't be surprised to see him hit 30 this season. Obviously, his start to the season wasn't great at all, and I still think he does have that potential in him. I think he can hit 30 goals, a couple times in his career. I think he's got a great shot, a great release. He's a deceptive shot on him, so I think he definitely could hit that. But I mean, it's a great accomplishment either way to hit 20. Kessler ends up hitting 20 as well on the season. Raquel hits 20, so a lot of guys getting to the milestone this year for the Ducks, and Perry obviously again leading the Ducks in goals and getting 34. So just a great performance, and like you said, putting the pressure on the Kings to beat the Jets in the same night.
Yeah, and then after this game, of course, everybody's watching the Kings and the Jets game. I didn't watch the beginning of it because I'll share a little secret with everybody. Every time I watch the Kings play, they win. I don't know what it is. I have no idea why, but when I turn it on, they could be losing by 2 or 3 goals in the third period, and they'll come back and win every time I watch. So the Jets are up. I'm sorry, the Jets are down 3-0. I'm getting all these messages about, oh, get ready for the Sharks. We're going to play the Sharks. What do you think? And blah, blah, blah. Text messages and messages on Facebook and Twitter and all that are going off because it's 3-0. So then it goes to 3-2. And I think to myself, okay, do I turn on the game or not? Because when I do, they, usually win. So I turn on the game. The Jets tie the game. I go, okay, I'm going to keep watching this game. So I watched all the third period, watched the overtime, watched the shootout. Couldn't believe that the Kings didn't win this game. And the Jets, they beat everybody. They beat the Sharks, they beat the Ducks, they beat the Kings. Obviously, they're not going to make the playoffs, but they play spoiler almost on everybody. And, what a battle that game was, Eddie. And then it set the table for Sunday against Washington. And the irony of this game is the Ducks were supposed to play Washington back in January. The snowstorm came. The game gets postponed. Washington sits a whole bunch of their regulars. You had Ovechkin that had the hat trick the night before, got his 50th goal. Hopi tied Brodeur's record for 48 wins on season. He sits. Orpik sits. A bunch of other players sit. The Ducks decide to go with everybody, minus Gibson and Kessler, who both go back home with minor injuries. We'll talk about all the injuries, but they're both going to be fine for game one, and we'll talk about that. But it set the stage. And even though Washington had a short-handed team, Eddie, the Ducks get it done. They win 2-0. Anderson was phenomenal in that. Even with the depleted Washington team, they played a tough game, especially in the first period there, and they tried to make a push in the third, but the Ducks were able to get it done, won the division for the fourth time in a row.
Yeah, and I think they're happy now that this game was pushed back all the way to now, and you get to sit some of the superstars on the league's best team. Who knows what could happen if this game had played when it should have been. The Caps on a roll. They're still the best team in hockey. You would have had to play against the all their players, Ovi, Holtby, everybody would have been playing, and you never know, they might have picked up a loss there, and we could be looking at a different situation now. But they still have to go into this game and beat a very good team. Even without the superstars, they're still a good team, and it was a great effort. Seeing Freddie come back at the end of the season was great, and having both him and Gibson healthy going into the playoffs is a big thing. In case one guy stumbles, you can put the other guy in, and just a great performance overall. Beating this team, keeping them off the score sheet, it's a good way to enter the playoffs.
Yeah, and it was the way that we all predicted, right, Eddie? Remember, we said the Ducks were going to win the division and it was going to be no problem, right? But, just like everybody else, the prediction came true, but obviously the way that the Ducks got there was not the way that we had all anticipated. So definitely exciting for them to come and win these last two games. The Kings blow it. They had their chance. The Ducks take the division banner. And I know a lot of people out there are like, who cares? It's a division banner. Whoop-de-doo. We've won the last three, and it hasn't mattered. But like we talked about, Eddie, to come back from last place, a couple months into the season in the Pacific Division, go all the way up to first on the very last day, it's just huge momentum. It's momentum that the Ducks are going to need, and we'll talk about in a minute, but in that matchup against Nashville, this is huge for the Ducks.
Yeah, and really, to be at Christmas, be last in the Pacific at 1 point, 16 points behind the LA Kings. We were all saying, oh, we'd just be happy to get in the wild card spot. We'd just be happy to get into the playoffs right now. The division doesn't really matter as long as we can get in, and we could be one of those teams that come in on the 8th spot or 7th spot and get in and make a run. Obviously, if you get in like that, you're going to have to play a very strong, Central Division team, and somehow they come back. They go 34-10-5 since Christmas, the best record in the NHL, and they just barely get by the Kings and win their 4th straight Pacific Division title. That's gotta be a huge momentum booster for the Ducks, and just a great accomplishment overall.
And talking about accomplishments, there's a few other things that the Ducks accomplished this season as well. They had the lowest goals against in the NHL at 2.29. They just barely beat out Washington. The shutout against Washington is what helped them win the William Jennings Trophy, which you have to give a lot of credit to Anderson and Gibson for getting that done. The team defense, even Hudobin a little bit too there in the beginning of the season, he had some decent starts as well. And what an honor. I mean, that's the first time in franchise history, Eddie, that the Ducks have achieved that. And we've talked about this before with hockey and all sports. Defense wins championships, and this is very, very good for the Ducks going into the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's great. And you always hear a lot of experts every year saying, "Oh, can you trust the Ducks goalies?" And I think, this is a big statement for them. Yes, you can trust us. I mean, we have the least amount of goals against. We split pretty much the whole season in starts. And you're going in as the best defensive team in the league. The only issue, and I'll speak to this too as well, is that it's tough to go into the season or into the postseason having two number ones. There's not a lot of teams who go into the postseason and end up winning it all playing both goalies. I think luckily, you never want to say luckily when a guy gets injured, but I think it was a good thing for the Ducks in the long run going into the playoffs, having one guy being able to start the majority of the starts going into the postseason, that being Gibson, with Freddie being out with a concussion, and now it looks like Gibby will be the starter going into the playoffs. And I think that was a good thing for him, him knowing right away he was going to be the number one guy, playing with confidence, playing, 4 straight games where he just played phenomenal. And he's going to go into the playoffs hot, and I think that's a big thing for the Ducks. But just a great accomplishment. It's a Ducks, a Ducks team, a style, a Ducks team we haven't really seen before, and them leading the league in goals against and winning the Jennings. It's just a huge accomplishment for the franchise.
And in addition to that, too, the Ducks also set the record for first in power play percentage and penalty kill percentage, which the last team to do that, Eddie, was the 1984-85 New York Islanders. So you have that for the Ducks to be proud about as well. Their special teams was on cue. In the beginning of the season, the penalty kill was, from the get-go was strong. The power play was not strong in the beginning and then came on later in the season. So that's a huge accomplishment in itself as well. And according to hockeyfights.com, the Ducks led the league in fights at 42, which, I mean, obviously we don't want to see probably too many of those in the playoffs. We want to see more goals and wins. But this is a Ducks team that, I mean, it's just balanced. They can fight, they can score, they can play defense, they play specialty teams well. And, going into the playoffs, and we'll talk about some of this stuff with Nashville, I'm more concerned about the Ducks playing their game. I'm not worried about Nashville and not playing the Sharks now, which we'll get to. But you have to tip your hat off just to the Ducks' well-rounded play in all areas of the game, Eddie.
Yeah, and this is something we've been waiting for a while. I mean, every year we wonder how is the power play struggling, or how is the penalty kill not as good as it should be. We've got some great shutdown guys. We brought in Kessler for the penalty kill. We have Getzlaf and Perry for the power play, and every year it seems to struggle. And finally, we get it this year, where not only one but two were the best in the league, and like you said, not hasn't happened since 1985. That bodes well going into the playoffs. And not only you have that, you have the Jennings Trophy to go along with that, and it's just a well-rounded team, like you said, and it's just great. As long as they play their game, they can beat anybody. I mean, with stats like that, they really should be able to beat anybody if they play on their game every night.
And before we get to the injuries and the playoff matchup, just one word from our sponsor real quick. Sons of Hockey sponsored us last show and this show as well. Check them out at sonsofhockey.com. Also at Twitter, Sons of Hockey. They sell hockey shirts for the Ducks and other teams as well. We support them and they support us. Josh runs that site and does a very good job, so please check them out. Back to the Ducks now. Going to the injuries now. I know that's a big concern. Everybody wants to know because there's players that sat and players that went in and out and all the call-ups and all of that this last weekend. Here's where we're at today. Obviously, stuff can change. This is just Monday. We've got 5 days or 4.5 days until the Ducks play, and things could change. But it looks like Stoner, Horkoff, and Santorelli are all fine, good to go. They had minor bumps and bruises. They played in that game against Washington. They are going to be good to go. Gibson and Kessler both did not play in Washington, but they are also going to be good to go for Game 1. And additionally, it sounds like Vatanen and Raquel will be ready to go for Game 1. So it looks like all of those players will be back, Eddie, The only question marks really for the series, it's going to come down to Bieksa, Perry, and Perron. We don't know the exact timeline on those. We heard Allers talk about the team, and he was thinking that everybody would be back for the first game. I don't know for sure about that, though. It really comes down to Bieksa, Perry, and Perron. I'm not sure about those three, but it looks like the Ducks will have everybody else ready to go for game one on Friday, as of right now.
Yeah, and that's extremely important. I mean, having Raquel back will be great. We've kind of missed that creativity in a couple games. You could see that especially against LA, as well as getting Vatanen back is going to be huge for the blue line. And being, he's generally the defenseman who creates off the rush. He's the best of Ducks defenseman at that. So having him back is going to be huge. And really, like you said, it does come down to Perry, BX, and Perron. And from what we've heard from Perron, we don't expect to see him in game one. More so, a mid to late first round, early second round is when we would hope to see him. But yeah, Perry and BX, we haven't heard too much about. Obviously Bieksa would be a great addition to the blue line, and Perry would add some more scoring depth. But I think, as long as everybody else is back, I think that's a healthy enough team and a good enough team to compete. Once you get Bieksa in there and Perry in there as well, and Perron hopefully in the first round, if not in the second round, that would be like a deadline acquisition in the playoffs. So it'll be great for them to get him back. But I think if you can go in, with only those three guys on the injury list, I think you're okay.
And speaking of that, the Ducks are going to face the Nashville Predators. This will be the second time that they face them. The last time was in the 2010-2011 season. If you remember that season, the Ducks had a chance to win Game 5. I was there in person. They were up by a goal. Of course, Shea Weber scored and sent that game to overtime, and they won Game 5 and then went on to win Game 6. So a little bit of payback for the Ducks here. They're going to play Nashville that eliminated them back then. We're going to go through the offense, the defense, the goalies, and the special teams. And we'll start with the offense. What do you think, Eddie, in terms of Nashville's forwards against the Ducks forwards? Who do you like and who do you give the advantage to in this series?
It's extremely close. And I think if you go off of depth and you look at all 12 forwards, it's important to look at, quality throughout the lineup. And I think the Ducks have that over the Predators. Even with missing guys like Perron and Perry, I think they still have that. Obviously, you got the two superstars in Getzlaf and Perry. You got the shutdown line, which has been together all season, in Ryan Kessler, Jakob Silfverberg, and Cogliano. And then you're gonna have Raquel back, and you could shoot him up with McGinn and Perry and decide what you want, and just being able to shuffle those all around, I think is going to be an advantage. But you can't count out Nashville. I mean, they have 230 goal scorers in Philip Forsberg and James Neal, and those are along with Ryan Johansson, that's going to be their main three forwards that you got to watch out for. And I believe. At times they do play on the same line, so that almost might be an advantage. If Ryan Kessler can shut down that line, there are still some guys who are threats in the lineup, but those are the three main guys you got to focus on. Mike Ribeiro, Craig Smith, they can still hurt you, but I think you do have to give the slight advantage here to the Ducks.
Yeah, and with that, we had one question about this too from Alex. He talks about the Ducks lineup and what do we think the lineup will be going in here, the forward line against Nashville. And of course, barring the injuries, that's going to affect what we think. But I think the two lines that you really have to go with, Eddie, and you mentioned one of them, is you have to go with the Kessler line again with Cogliano and Silfverberg, obviously. Is that the shutdown line, like you said? If they can take down Nashville's big line, that's going to be a huge key in this forward matchup. Also, you got to go with McGinn, Raquel, and Perry. I think that's another huge line. You got to put them back together and go in this series. If they do that, then you would go with Getzlaf, Stewart, and then maybe Garbutt. He was doing good with that line on the top there, so that might be your third line. And then the fourth line would fill in with Horkoff, Thompson, Wagner, Santorelli, and whoever else you want to throw in there. But that may be the lineup you go with. The Ducks could keep Getzlaf and Perry together too. We may see that with McGinn. That's another line that I wouldn't be opposed to seeing as well. So that's kind of how the lines, I think, will match up, Eddie, against the Nashville Predators.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting because if Kessler can do a good job of shutting them down, and if Forsberg, Neal, and Johansson do play together, which it'll be interesting to see what they do, and I think that's what will come into how Boudreau will set up his lineups. If Forsberg, Neal, and Johansson play together, I think it would be better to play Getzlaf with Perry, because then if that line can shut down the Nashville's top line, you've got a huge advantage in being able to throw out two superstars against a team that really doesn't have a shutdown line. I mean, Ribeiro is not much of a shutdown center. He's more of a playmaking guy. Craig Smith is a big guy as well, but I don't think they really have other than Mike Fisher, Colin Wilson. It's hard to say they really have a shutdown guy, like a Ryan Kessler. So I think if they do play all the superstars on one line, it would be beneficial to play Getzlaf with Perry. But you also have the option to split them up, and you could play, like you said, Raquel, McGinn, and Perry on a line, Getzlaf and Stewart, and maybe Garbett or Perry on that top line, and then you've got more depth. And that's something we've talked about all season, which is a huge advantage for the Ducks, being able to switch up their lineup. Getzlaf isn't no longer a staple to play with Perry, and I think that's a huge advantage for the Ducks going in.
And with that, what about the defense then? I mean, how would Nashville defend against the Ducks if the Ducks go with Perry and Getzlaf together or separate? What do you think? Who has the edge in the defense? Do you think the Ducks have a better defense, or do you think Nashville has a better defense?
Yeah, this question is tough too. I mean, if you look at the names on paper, I think you have to go with Nashville just because they have two top defensemen in Roman Josi and Shea Weber. And then they've got two really good top four pairings in Matthias Ekholm and Ryan Ellis. But in straight depth across all three pairings, I think that advantage goes to the Ducks. I think the bottom pairing in Nashville is a lot weaker, and if you can get a Getzlaf line or a Perry line against that bottom pairing, that's going to be an advantage. I think the Ducks, when healthy, have three pairings which are very strong. But you just for the star power and the ability of Shea Weber and Roman Josi, I think you have to give a small advantage to the Nashville Predators, at least on the defensive end.
I agree, and I think the strategy for the Ducks, if they're really gonna take advantage of the Nashville defense, if there is such a thing as taking advantage, they're really going to have to wear down those top four, like you mentioned, Eddie, because if the Ducks can wear out the top four and Nashville can't put in that third pair as much, then maybe the Ducks can wear them down, get some goals, and score, because Nashville's not going to be able to put those guys out all the time, especially the first two games at home at Honda Center. Obviously, the home team has the last change. The Ducks are definitely going to have to look for that kind of advantage in trying to win these first two games against Nashville.
Yeah, and these are two guys who log a lot of minutes too. I mean, they're both minuses on a team that has a lot of plus on the blue line actually in Nashville, and that kind of shows on how much they're playing. They're playing in all situations, pretty much half the game at times. So they're going to be out there a lot. You got to take advantage of being able to make the changes that you want when you're on home ice. It's going to be a tough matchup. And, they're two very good defensemen. You're going to have to take advantage when the other guys are out on the ice and hopefully make them pay.
And moving along to the goalie situation, we know that Gibson's going to start game one. He'll probably go game two. We don't know that for sure, but that's probably what's going to happen. But what do you think? Gibson against Rinne, how do you think the Ducks are going to do against their goalie, which he's a pretty solid goaltender over there in Nashville?
Yeah, and definitely Rinne isn't what he used to be. Not saying he's a bad goalie anymore. He's actually been very good since the Christmas break. He started off terrible to begin the season, but he's been pretty good since then. We finished with some respectable numbers, 34 wins on the season. So a good season for him. He started 66 games, which is something you're used to seeing from him. But I think I don't want to be biased here, but I give the advantage to the Ducks. I like how Gibson has played all season. He started 38 games. His numbers are phenomenal. He's got a 2.07 goals against average and a .92 save percentage. And those are some great numbers going along with 21 wins as well. And I think he's just been outstanding. He's been great since he's had to, take over the starting reins when Freddie's been out with a concussion. And I think he's coming in with a lot of confidence. You've seen that in the games that he's played. He got a nice rest the other day, and Freddie came in and showed that he can still play, and he's fine after coming back from a concussion. And outside of Pekka Rinne in Nashville, if he struggles, they're done. I mean, Carter Hutton is not going to win them a series, and I think with that, I think you have to give the advantage to the Ducks.
And we had one fan question about that too from Eric. He asked about Pekka Rinne's playoff experience and how he did, and have some stats here for you. You know, he's been in the playoffs 4 times, going back to the 2009-2010 season with Nashville, and his record hasn't been that great, Eddie. 15 wins, 19 losses, save percentage 9.14, not too bad. Goals against 2.48, which is average. So he hasn't been that great in the playoffs. I mean, obviously they beat the Ducks back in 2010, 2011, as we mentioned earlier. So we're looking for a little bit of payback. But I think the key against Pekka Rinne is you got to get traffic in front. Obviously, he's a big goaltender, and you got to go to the net, and that's going to be the key. You got to get McGinn in there. You got to get Perry in there. Hopefully, when Perron gets back, maybe he'll be in the last couple games of the series, and also Raquel. I think that's going to be a big key, is creating traffic, driving the net, and making life miserable for Pekka Rinne in the crease.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too is these two teams haven't played each other since November. They're both extremely different teams since they played each other. Obviously, the Ducks have gone on a roll since then, and Nashville has been played steady. They've gotten a lot more scoring since we last played them. They do have the season series on us 2-1. But if you look at the all-time record against the Predators, the Ducks are 36-21-7. They're 23-6-3 at Honda Center. 13, 15, and 4 on the road at Bridgestone Arena. So I mean they've dominated them at Honda Center, and since 2012, 2013, they're 9-3-0, and that is including them being 1-2-0 against them this season. They're 5-1-0 at Honda Center, and a respectable 4-2-0 at Bridgestone Arena. So I think it actually there's a big favorable advantage here, having home ice advantage with them dominating Nashville at Honda Center. All-time record, and even since 2012, 2013. So it's a big advantage there. And Bridgestone Arena is a hard arena to go into. They do a great job of a playoff atmosphere there. They paint it yellow. They do an extremely good job of preventing other fans from getting into the arena. It's 99.9% Nashville Predators fans in the arena, so it's going to be a tough atmosphere. But I think they'll be able to pull it out with their stellar record at home.
So you're telling me that the Ducks are going to sweep Nashville, right? Beat them?
I
No,
don't
just
think we're
kidding.
gonna
I know.
see a Winnipeg Calgary situation like we did last year. I think the teams this year going into the Western Conference, maybe barring Minnesota, are 7 to 8 very strong teams compared to last year.
No, I know. Just get in there. But I mean, this is going to be a tough series for sure. I mean, it's going to be orange against yellow. The last part of this to look at is the special teams play, Eddie. Obviously, everybody knows the Ducks are number one in penalty kill and power play. Nashville is 10th at 19.7 in power play, and they're 16th on the penalty kill at 81.2%, which aren't terrible numbers. They're not that far off from the Ducks. So the special teams play, I think you agree, we obviously give it to the Ducks. But again, it's going to be competitive, Eddie, on penalty kill and power plays.
Yeah, I think you have to give it to the Ducks. I mean, you against anybody, you would have to give it to the Ducks with them being first in both categories and being amazing on the penalty kill all season, and how their power plays picked up in the second half of the season. It's a clear advantage. Nashville is sitting around the league average in both. Sitting 10th in power play, like you said, and 16th in penalty kill. So I think you got to take advantage of that when you get opportunities. Hopefully, if you ever see a guy like Weber or Yossi sitting in the box, that's when you've got to take advantage of the power play. Those are the two guys who are going to carry them through some penalty kills in this series. And if they're ever not on the ice, I think that's when you've got to take a huge advantage and make them pay. And I think that will be a big key factor to them coming out victors in this series.
I think the only other key factor too, Eddie, is faceoffs. The Ducks are 51.9% efficient, and Nashville's 48.7%. So that's going to be huge too. If the Ducks can control the faceoffs, which has been a strength we've talked about last season when they got Kessler going through the whole season, this season as well. The faceoffs have been key for the Ducks. If they can control that in this series, I think they'll have a chance to obviously win the series and move on to round two.
Yeah, and really, Nashville is the worst playoff team going in at faceoff percentage, and the Ducks are second best behind the Minnesota Wild, and that's going to be huge. I mean, right now, on paper, you would expect them to dominate in the faceoffs, and really, that's what we would hope to see. You get a lot more chances in the offensive zone. You'd be winning some defensive faceoffs, too, as well, on a penalty kill. And I mean that's a battle that we expect the Ducks to win, and we hope they win because that's going to be a huge factor, like you said. It's going to play a key role in this series, and I think it's going to be something that helps them eventually, pull out the win.
And with that, let's get to some more fan questions here. Some of it related to this matchup, some of it basically aimed at the playoffs. We had Matt ask us, "Are you happy that the Ducks are playing Nashville instead of the Sharks?" And I've talked about this a couple times on social media and whatnot, and I think you're in agreement with me on this, Eddie. I'm not really happy that the Ducks play Nashville or San Jose. I'm really more concerned that the Ducks play their game. Hopefully, we get as many people healthy by Friday for game one, and we go from there. If we take the inside lanes, if we forecheck, we get into the net, we'll be fine. When the Ducks get into trouble is when they don't do those things and when they have too many turnovers and bad passes. When you see them lose games, that's the biggest problem. They get away from their game, and that's when they lose, Eddie. That's what you have to go back to. Even in the beginning of the season, the defense has been there. The goalies have been there for the Ducks. It's whether or not they can execute on the offensive play. To me, it's going to be the key for the Ducks in this series and the entire playoffs.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm in the same boat there. I was indifferent to the situation. I think they're two completely different matchups, and San Jose is a very strong team. They've scored a lot of goals this season. They've scored 241 goals. Their goaltending is a little bit suspect still. Their play at home was terrible. They're 18-20-3 at home, but their road play was the best in the league. So it would have been a tricky situation there. I mean, a home play can turn at any time, especially in the playoffs with the atmosphere there, and them being such a dominant team on the road. I think it would have been a tough matchup, but let's not kid ourselves. Playing Nashville is going to be tough as well. And really, I mean, I was indifferent to the whole situation, but I think winning the Pacific Division is huge motivation, and being able to go into Friday being Pacific Division champs, to have goalies who are the Jennings Trophy winners, and I think that's going to be all huge motivation going into Game 1.
And the added bonus, too, that we probably didn't mention is with the Ducks winning the division, I'm not saying that they're going to beat Nashville, but if they get by Nashville, they're going to face either San Jose or the Kings, and they're going to have home ice going into that series, too, Eddie, which, I mean, I know the Ducks have lost the Game 7s at home, and a lot of people talk about that, but still, you want to have that home ice for the first two rounds at least. And if they go on to the Western Conference Final, then it would depend on who comes out of the Central. The Ducks may or may not have home ice there as well. But it's still big, especially going against San Jose or the Kings if we get there after this Nashville series.
Yeah, and I think the way it works out is they do have home ice in this game. They would have home ice in the second series. I think they already have lost home ice against any Central team because each Central team has more points or has the tiebreaker on them. But either way, like you said, having home ice, especially in the first series, and if you get into round 2 and playing either LA or San Jose and having home ice there is going to be a huge advantage. And the Ducks always have strong play at Honda Center, like you said. Though there have been some issues lately. Obviously last year against Chicago Blackhawks. But, it's always nice being able to play 4 games at home max in a playoff series. And I think that's going to be a big advantage if they're going to make a deep run this year.
And speaking of deep runs, we had another question from at MGNickD on Twitter that asks about the Ducks going all the way to getting the cup and what are their chances. I think the chances are really good, Eddie. I think the chances this year compared to the last 3 seasons, which we all had high hopes those 3 seasons as well, I think this year, especially getting most of the players back by Friday, I really believe this is the Ducks' best chance this year. I mean, obviously Nashville's not going to be easy. It's going to be a hard-fought series and round 1, but I like the Ducks' chances. I really think that they can go deep. I think that they can get past the first 2 rounds, get to the Western Conference Final, and get to the Stanley Cup. I mean, obviously a lot of things can happen in the next 2 months, but I really have a good feeling that they can go at least to the final this year.
Yeah, and it's a different Ducks team. We've been saying it all season. It's a different Ducks team than we've seen in previous years. And honestly, I think if you take this team and put them in the place of last year's team, I think they go all the way and they win it. I think the matchups in last year's playoffs were a lot easier. Winnipeg being just in the playoffs, Calgary as well, being able to sweep past them. And I think that the way the Ducks play this year would have matched up a lot better against the speedy Chicago team. in the Western Conference Final, and they almost took it anyway in going to 7 games. But the way they play this year, and they've had to battle it out. The record isn't as good as it was last year, but I don't think it really matters. I mean, the defensive play has been key this year. It's a lot tougher matchups, especially having to play Nashville in the first round, and then playing either LA or San Jose in the second round, and then playing one of those ridiculous Central Division teams in either Dallas, St. Louis, or Chicago in round 3. It's going to be a tough trip there, but I think they have what it takes this year. They've done everything right. They battled back from a bad start. The best record since Christmas. They win the Pacific Division. I think everything's in their favor right now to make a deep run to the Stanley Cup Final.
And talking about the playoffs too, we have one more question. Talking about all the first round matchups, we have Kyle that asks about if we think there'll be any upsets in the first round. And I guess we can start with the Western Conference and go to the Eastern Conference, Eddie. If I look at this side of the NHL, I would think probably the biggest upset, and it's not really an upset, I guess, would be St. Louis beating Chicago. I mean, obviously St. Louis has more points, but Chicago's kind of had their number. So I'm looking in these series, I think St. Louis beating Chicago might be a surprise in the West. San Jose and LA, that's a tough one. I don't know. The Sharks could pull that one off too. Again, LA's had their number. And then you have Dallas and Minnesota, which I think Dallas will probably pull that one out. But if I had to pick one of the matchups, I think St. Louis would probably be maybe the one that would be a surprise, Eddie, even though they are technically the favored team by record in this series.
Yeah, and it really, the biggest surprise, if anything, would be if Minnesota were to beat Dallas. I don't think anybody thinks it's going to happen. Dallas owned them in the season series 4-1. I honestly have them taking it, 100% of the time. I wouldn't bet against them. I think they're going to go through in that one. I do agree with you. I do have St. Louis beating Chicago. I don't see it as an upset as much. I know, Chicago are the champs. They probably are favored over St. Louis despite the points standing, and even St. Louis having the season series edge 3-2. But I think St. Louis has what it takes this year. I think the Blackhawks missing Duncan Keith in Game 1. Corey Crawford just coming off an injury. You don't know if he's going to be 100%. I think if St. Louis can jump on them early with the home ice advantage, I think they could take this series. And I guess it would be an upset with Chicago being the defending Stanley Cup champs. But, and we already talked a bunch about our series too. I think that the next biggest upset would probably be Nashville beating us. I think a lot of people do have Nashville going in past the Ducks, but I think the Ducks should be able to handle them. And then you look at the California series down there with San Jose versus LA. I think San Jose getting through would be an upset on the cards as well.
Yeah, San Jose is definitely going to want some a payback after the way LA's played them the last couple playoff series. If you look at the Eastern Conference and the matchups, I really think the one for me that sticks out in my mind, Eddie, is Detroit against Tampa Bay. Because Tampa Bay, obviously with Stamkos out and getting more injuries in this last week, I think Detroit's the team that maybe pulls that one off. They split the season series 2-2. That's the big one to me. All the rest, they're pretty tight. I mean, I think Washington gets by Philly. Pittsburgh takes out New York. Florida and the Islanders, that might be a little bit more of a closer one, but I still think the Panthers win that one as well.
Yeah, I think the East is definitely a lot closer than the West. I do think the Panthers squeak it out against the Islanders. I think they have better goaltending and Roberto Luongo, and I think they just have better team chemistry. They're going to rally around Jaromir Jagr, and I think they'll get by them. And the Detroit one is very interesting. I mean, like you said, Steven Stamkos is out. Tyler Johnson is now out for an undisclosed amount of time. And those are two key players for them as well. And I mean, they're going to have to rely a lot on Bishop and a lot on Nikita Kucherov and Andre Palat and a lot of the other guys. Jonathan Drouin, who scored 2 goals since coming back from the Syracuse in the AHL, he's going to be relied upon a pot too. And and it's unfortunate to say because I don't want to see them move on, but I think Detroit is going to get through this series. They might rally. On this being Datsuk's last season in the NHL, and they might be able to squeak by San Jose and get into the next round. Moving on to Philly and Washington, I honestly think this is going to be a lot closer than some people think. I mean, Philly has had to battle back and fight hard to get into the playoffs. After bringing up Shane Gostisbehere, who's going to be up for a Calder Trophy for sure. He's been amazing for them. He's helped them get in. Wayne Simmons, Claude Giroux, Jacob Voracek, Steve Mason has been playing out of his mind lately too. I think they have an extremely good team, and I think they're going to play this series tight. Washington, I think, is going to have to eventually take the series, but I think it's going to be a lot closer to people think, and it's going to take about 6 and 7 games. And then finally, Pittsburgh versus the Rangers. In my opinion, I think this is the series where this could be a sweep. And I mean, a lot of people probably are gonna wonder how I could pick Pittsburgh to be the Rangers in the sweep. But I think Lundqvist has been struggling lately. Pittsburgh, other than the Ducks, have been the hottest team in the NHL since Christmas. They've got back all the way into second in the Eastern Conference from where they started. Then they've done this without Evgeny Malkin. If he's back for the playoffs, Sidney Crosby, Chris Letang, Fleury, and Matt Murray for them have been outstanding in goal, and I think they could even make a run all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals this year. That's how good they've been.
You mentioned Detroit in there too. What did you think about Datsuk and his announcement about playing his final season in NHL?
Yeah, I mean he does have 1 year on one more year on his contract, but it looks like from what he said to the media and from what NHL.com and other places are reporting is he's going to leave to go back to Russia for family reasons and end his career, and I think that's huge news for Detroit. I mean they just scraped into the playoffs this year. They only got in because of a 6-1 Boston Bruins loss to the Ottawa Senators. They ended up losing their final game of the season to the Rangers that they needed a point in to get in. Luckily, they had the tiebreaker on regulation overtime wins. And he's a key player to their franchise. And losing a guy like that, I mean, he is 38. He was eventually going to retire, but it's going to hurt them next year. There's no one on that lineup that's going to replace him. Larkin will take a step forward. Zetterberg's getting older. Cronwall, Jimmy Howard, they're all getting older. I think this is going to be a tough transition for the team, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them fighting for a playoff spot next year. But honestly, I think next year's the year the streak finally ends if he's not there.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with Detroit this playoff run and then next season if he does in fact hang it up in the NHL this year. With that, pretty much going to wrap up the show, Eddie. We're going to do, more podcasts during the playoffs. Kind of depends on how the series goes. We may do one next week after the first 2 games and then see after that. Sometimes we try to do one in the middle of a series and then at the end of a series. So we'll have to play it by ear. We are going to have watch parties. I'll have to figure out the dates on that for you. I'll get you that information as well. And we still do have our NHL bracket going on. If you check it out, it's Ducks and Pucks under the NHL.com website. Go on there and sign up. Please email us your info that you sign up with at info@DucksNPucks.com. First place is going to get a free custom jersey of your choice from Monkey Sports, or actually specifically Goalie Monkey in Santa Ana, which is part of Monkey Sports. And the second and third place winners will also get some other free Ducks and Pucks gear or Ducks-related stuff as well. So look for that. Please sign up for that. We'll post the updates on the watch party. We'll keep you informed as things come out. And I just want to really thank everybody for the support. Ducks and Pucks has been around for 3 seasons now covering the Ducks. Eddie and I have covered the Ducks on the podcast for the last 2 seasons. And this really came out of nowhere, Eddie. I mean, you know the story. Those of you that haven't followed us from the beginning, all this was a T-shirt idea that ended up becoming a website and now, radio show / podcast. So it's really grown. We've got a lot of support from Fox Sports West, Eric Stevens at the Register, people on the Ducks, Phil Hewitt, a lot of support. And I really appreciate the support from all of the professionals out there. Of course, all of you listening as well. It's been, huge, and it's been a whirlwind. And I have to give a lot of credit to you, Eddie, too, because you came up with this idea when I said, I sound kind of dumb on the radio, but I'm glad I didn't listen to myself, and we did this, Eddie. It's been fun the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, it's been great, and it's been an interesting experience. It's something I actually never thought I would do. I mean, when the opportunity presented itself, I wouldn't want to do it, talk about anything other than the Ducks, and it's been great so far, and hopefully this year we can end it off with a Stanley Cup victory, and we can have a Stanley Cup celebration podcast, and that will be something that we could look forward to. But no, either way, it's been great, and it's 2 seasons now, and hopefully we'll keep going from here.
Definitely, and I know there's other sources out there for Ducks information, unofficial ones too as well, and the more the better, but I'm glad that you guys listen to us and read our articles and support the things that we do. We're all about pumping up the Ducks and keeping everybody informed in SoCal, and let's just go Ducks, and hopefully we'll make a deep playoff run like Eddy said and get to the Stanley Cup final. So we'll see you in a week. Let's go Ducks.